Welcome, everyone. Thank you to both Chris White, who is the national correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter, and to Steve Schneck, who is national co-chair of Catholics for Biden, for taking part in this discussion. And we're going to be looking at Joe Biden, his faith, and the importance of the Catholic vote in the forthcoming US presidential election. Chris White is a real expert on the Catholic vote and on Joe Biden, and Steve Schneck obviously has got a lot of experience in this area as a former faith advisor to President Obama. I want to start by asking, I'll start with Chris White. My first question about Joe Biden and his faith. If you look back at history, I remember, I don't remember, but we can remember and look at JFK's famous speech about his religion, where he had to almost apologize for being a Catholic. He had to say, look, I will not take my instructions from the Pope if I am elected. He was almost having to downplay his Catholic faith. How does that compare with Joe Biden and his faith from what you have seen in your reporting? Joe Biden seems to be someone who's much more confident and much more open about his faith. Is that what you would surmise?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris, and thanks to all of you for joining us. I think one thing that's important to note is that, when Kennedy was elected, his Catholicism was certainly in the spotlight throughout the campaign under much scrutiny, but it wasn't as personal. It was more cultural and reflexive. With Joe Biden, it's very innate. He has his rosary beads in his pocket, and he's quick to cross himself when he's talking about matters even specifically linked to faith. And it's just much more of a natural instinct for him to gravitate to his faith. He's previously said, while he's no theologian, that theology is an avocation of his. That's the sort of language that you never heard from Kennedy. In fact, when a biographer suggested to Eunice Shriver, that a book be written on JFK's faith, she said that will be a remarkably thin volume. With Biden, he can't get through most speeches without referencing his faith, and he does so in particularly personal terms, particularly around themes of loss and suffering, having suffered, tremendously and in a very public way in the loss of first his wife and one-year-old daughter when he was first elected to the Senate, and more recently in 2015 through his son, Beau, from brain cancer. And I think his instinct in talking about how this has affected him and how he's gotten through it has been to lead with a story of faith. And so we've just seen time and time again a way that faith has been in the spotlight for him.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Steve, can you give me your thoughts on Joe Biden's faith in terms of how important it is to him?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today, Chris. I've been with Joe Biden a few times in very personal, kind of small gatherings. When Pope Francis visited the United States in 2015, I was with a group of people, a very small group of people that met with the Vice President several times in helping to plan that. And I can say just from my experience in those very small meetings that he is somebody who, even in private life, talks about his faith and reflects on its faith as it pertains to the moral issues of the day. And I have to say, I find it very authentic, very refreshing. As Chris mentioned, he's known for carrying a rosary in his pocket. I've actually seen that rosary. So it's an authentic faith, and it's interesting. I actually like the way that Chris compared it with Kennedy. For Kennedy, Catholicism, I have to say, was frankly more cultural than it was religious. With Biden, it's both. both cultural and religious. This is someone, who is serious about his faith.
Okay, thank you for sharing those personal insights. One area, though, of course, where Joe Biden has been attacked for not being Catholic enough, or for somehow not being in line with the church, is over the question of abortion. And of course, remember the nun, the religious sister at the Trump convention, or the Republican convention, who attacked Biden for his position on abortion. But can you just tell us, what is Joe Biden's position on abortion? Because there's been a lot of, I think, misinformation about where he actually stands on it. Now, we should say that, of course, the Catholic Church's position is that no political candidate can support abortion in an abortion law. However, there are, of course, lots of different positions within that. But can you tell us where does Joe Biden stand on abortion?
Joe Biden's position is that is that within the context of his faith, he opposes abortion, but that as a matter of public law, he supports the availability of abortion in the United States.
And how would, sorry, go on, Chris.
Yes, I mean, Steve put it quite succinctly there. I think, when Joe Biden entered politics, in the early 1970s, which was right around the time of Roe v. Wade, 1973, the Supreme Court decision in the states which legalized abortion throughout the country. He was vocal at the time, and he said he thought it went too far. It was a ruling that made him uncomfortable. The Democratic Party's position on abortion has evolved over the decades, and Joe Biden has had to sort of modify his public stance along the way. But I mean, he has remained sort of steadfast in always qualifying his embrace of church teaching on the matter, while saying when it comes to public policy, I can't impose this on the nation. And it was quite interesting just this week, the Bishop of San Diego, Robert McElroy, who is one of the more prominent voices among the U.S. Catholic bishops, certainly would be considered one of the allies of Pope Francis in the U.S. He gave a talk where he said, look, it's a real shame that we're seeing folks question Joe Biden's Catholicism because of one specific area of policy disagreement. And he reminded Catholics that when it comes to abortion, not as a theological or a doctrinal matter, but when it comes to abortion politics, that is a matter of prudential judgment.
Okay, but do you think, Steve, that he's disappointed some Catholics by not having a stronger anti-abortion stance? Or some Democrats supporting Catholics, I should say.
Yes. I think that without doubt, Joe Biden's position is a disappointment to some American Catholics for whom the abortion issue is not only preeminent, but needs to be approached in just one particular fashion. I don't know how familiar you are with this, Chris, but for the most part, the Catholic Church in the United States has approached the abortion issue as a matter of law and is seeking to strike down laws and overturn court rulings that allow abortion in the United States. There's nothing in moral theology, there's nothing in Catholic doctrine that requires that particular approach. There might be many other ways by which a faithful Catholic could in public life, work in support of the position of the church in regards to abortion. But Biden certainly has been a disappointment for those who think that the only solution is to overturn Roe v. Wade and to make abortions illegal in the United States.
Okay, thank you. I want to now move on to the importance of the Catholic vote in the forthcoming election. Obviously, it was Catholic voters in swing states that handed Trump the presidency, or helped hand Trump the presidency in 2016. We've seen in the polls that Biden is leading, but of course it's not the not the national polls that we need to look at. It's the swing states, because it's the electoral college, obviously not the popular vote. How is it going for Biden in those swing states in terms of the Catholic vote? What is the Catholic vote doing in those important electoral areas? And I'll start with let's start with Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Actually, Biden's doing surprisingly well with the Catholic vote in those swing states. If we look particularly at the Rust Belt swing states, and that would be states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Eastern Iowa, I mean, there's been a shift actually in the Catholic vote from where they were in 2016. So that the most recent polling from the Pew Forum, for example, indicates almost a 19-point shift in white Catholic support for Biden. They still support Trump, white Catholics in across the United States, but in particular in these Rust Belt states. They still support Trump at a certain level. So the last number that I saw was 52% for Trump and 44% for Biden, and that's in the last week or so. But back in August, there was a 19-point spread there, not an 8-point spread. So so the shift in the Catholic vote, I think, has been critical for Biden's success in winning over these swing states.
And Chris.
Steve talked about the 19-point shift. That's even down further from 2016 when Trump won that same white Catholic vote by a 33% difference. And it's quite interesting. You see both campaigns have realized that the path to victory is effectively through the white Catholic vote. And the Catholic groups that are working both for and against Trump's reelection have, in a sense, targeted Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan as, places where this race will be decided, and there are sizable groups of Catholics in each state. So if you take both the Catholic voters in these states and the fact that you have a Catholic candidate on one of the major party tickets, it's a pretty exhausting time for folks on the religion beat.
So
if I could add something to that, Chris, let's not forget the Latino vote, Latino Catholic vote in this as well, particularly in swing states like Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. In those states, the Latino Catholic vote is going to be critical. I mean, it's a complicated vote, but by and large, Biden is doing very well with the Latino Catholic vote in the United States, and that's in fact overall in the United States, the last numbers I saw were that Catholics in the United States, counting both Latinos and whites and blacks and everyone else, are supporting Biden 51 to 44 over Trump.
So you're confident of a Biden victory?
I am confident about the Biden victory. That's not to say that I'm going to stop running until we cross that tape. There's still a lot of work to do in the next 2.5 weeks.
Can I ask? I want to ask Chris White this about the groups of Catholics who are backing Trump, and of course have been very much attacking Biden. There is this, what I would call, a kind of hypostatic union between the Trump supporting Catholics and people who are opposed to Pope Francis. What can you tell us about the Trump supporters from the Catholic side? Maybe explain to us why someone who is Catholic would want to back Trump, although Trump has presented himself as pro-life. There isn't much evidence of that. Can you tell us about your reporting on that?
Sure. So last month I did 2 separate pieces, one looking at Catholic groups working to elect President Trump, and the other looking at Catholic groups opposing the election of President Trump. And the first thing I want to say, if you look at the 4 different groups I profiled of Catholics trying to actively elect President Trump, the major thing that I like to start with in talking about them is that when Trump was just a candidate in the Republican primary in 2016, these same Catholics all began by opposing his nomination. Many of them signed a letter saying that he was manifestly unfit to be president of the United States. And they did so buttressing their arguments based on their faith. And they were highly suspect of his pro-life credentials. Now, as the race progressed and he became the nominee, they eventually coalesced around him with this promise that he would effectively promise to nominate pro-life judges that would eventually overturn Roe v. Wade. And to a certain extent, he's delivered for them. This has been a largely transactional relationship. He has kept to his list of promised names of judges that he would nominate to the court, and he's come and attended the March for Life, which is this massive pro-life gathering that takes place every January in Washington, D.C. Now, his Catholic critics will quickly say that he may have, in fact, handed the pro-life side some victories in the U.S., but he's doing long-term and significant damage to the cause of pro-life concerns in this country because he's compromised the moral credibility of its witness. And that, I think, is where you see sort of the divide among U.S. conservatives, where those that are quick to say that he's compromised the pro-life witness tend to be those who would be supportive of Pope Francis, who would say that being pro-life has to constitute a more consistent ethic, one that sees an equal sacredness or an equal dignity in the life of the immigrant, the person on death row, those suffering from the effects of climate change, and the list continues. Whereas those that tend to rally around President Trump would also be suspect of Pope Francis's sort of throwaway culture that he critiques, this sort of all-encompassing life ethic. And that, I think, is where the real fault lines lie. Those that are single-issue voters and those who are multi-issue voters, if you will.
When Pope Francis, though, is the biggest problem for the Trump-supporting Catholics, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I think many pro-life Catholics who are supporting President Trump really have been forced to reckon with Pope Francis's words in Gaudete Exultate, his letter from a few years ago, where he talked about equally sacred are the lives of the unborn and the lives of the immigrant, and that if you sort of segment one population out of this sort of consistent ethic, it all risks crumbling. And that is effectively what I think you're seeing within sort of the pro-life community in the US, is those that fear that there's a crumbling effect because of this singular focus on abortion without an embrace of other ways of being pro-life.
Steve, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, actually, I think that Chris has said it very well. One thing that I maybe add to the mix is that I don't think it can be overstated the extent to which America's political polarization is echoed among American Catholics. And it's, I think, astonishing how deeply this goes and how far this political polarization goes in defining values and attitudes and so forth among Americans. And so, while both groups may in fact, want to call themselves Catholic, in fact, the red-blue state divide, the conservative progressive divide in the United States actually explains more than the Catholic faith and how many citizens vote and how many citizens respond to Pope Francis. I think the same polarization, sweeps through the whole thing.
I mean, you've got a collision course or a collision already going on between what the Pope is saying and for example, the position of Bill Barr, the Attorney General, on the death penalty. I mean, how is the Pope's definition that now the death penalty is inadmissible? How is that impacting? Because you see what Bill Barr is doing, and Bill Barr, of course, is a very prominent Catholic, is a member of the Knights of Columbus. How is that playing out?
Well, it of course has been treated as something of a scandal. In fact, recently, a pretty prominent Catholic organization that organizes a yearly Catholic prayer breakfast in the United States gave an award for faithfulness to Christian Catholic doctrine, and they gave it to Bill Barr, and it was. I think a major scandal, and it was interesting to see, even within the episcopacy of the United States, several American bishops came out expressing their concern about this conservative Catholic organization honoring someone who is at the very moment almost, initiating the administrative trigger that was executing federal death row inmates. So it's been a scandal, I think, and it's something that I think that the church is still roiled with here in the United States, and not just in the United States, but in Rome as well.
And Chris?
Around the same time as the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, there was a panel, as everyone is enduring, we're having all of these Zoom panels that are happening day and night these days. But this was one focused on the Catholic vote, and the former Republican governor of New Hampshire, who is a well-known Catholic, close collaborator with Reagan and John Paul II, was talking about Pope Francis and the death penalty, and in one quick soundbite, I think he effectively illustrated the mindset of many conservative American Catholics, which he said, I think a lot of us are just, I think he said, closing our ears until the Argentine socialist is out of office, referring to Pope Francis. And I think that kind of approach is, they want to believe that the Francis papacy and the way his emphasis on other issues is perhaps an aberration in the life of the church, and that perhaps come the next pope, their issues of life being abortion only, and marriage and family will sort of be back as sort of center stage.
Can I ask you another point that I wanted to look at, was how the elements of the Republican Party, how Catholics or people who are Republicans, maybe not even Catholics, see the Catholic Church as the sort of vehicle for their political agenda. How has that happened within the US political context? Because I'm thinking of, say, for example, the Koch brothers who funded the Catholic University of America. The Catholic Church seems to have become a vehicle for some elements of the Republican Party or conservative thought in the US, which is now almost is totally divorced from what Pope Francis is saying. How has that happened? Can you explain a little bit about that phenomenon?
Well, I'll say a few things, but Steve is probably best on this subject because he's lived it and witnessed it in real time over the years. I want to point to one specific moment, and that was a few Saturdays ago when President Trump held a ceremony at the White House to announce the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to become the next Supreme Court justice to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat. And in addition to that event becoming a super spreader event for COVID, I think it's interesting if you take a wide lens photo from that event and those who were at that ceremony, you effectively get a glimpse of who's pulling the levers of the Republican Party in the United States, who's filling their coffers financially, and the vast majority of them are all Catholic. So you had the heads of the major pro-life organizations in the United States. You had the head of one of the major religious liberty groups, who is currently advancing most of the Supreme Court cases on that front of the United States, and a number of other prominent conservative Catholics, all at that event. I think it was just about 150 attendees there, and you get the sense that there is, if you look at these individuals and the institutions that they represent, you just kind of get the sense that the lines have become really blurred, and it's hard to see what's driving what, whether it's their faith that's driving their politics or vice versa. And I think that event kind of encapsulates just how enmeshed the Catholic Church and the Republican Party, what sort of bedfellows that they've become in this country.
Thank you. And Steve?
To just give you a little bit of the history of this, beginning in the Reagan era and in response to an economic letter from the American bishops that was arguably very progressive, conservatives in the United States essentially began a decades-long process of building structures of their own that parallel the organization of the church in the United States. And so they established institutes, and they founded, they provided for academic chairs, and they created their own news organizations, and so on and so forth. And all of this, as I say, is a kind of a parallel magisterium within the Catholic Church in the United States that's all funded and organized by very conservative Catholic money. And that group that Chris just alluded to, being present there in the Rose Garden for the announcement of Amy Coney Barrett, I mean, that group is the top of that iceberg in a sense. And it's a broad movement in the United States. It's become very institutionalized, so much so that sometimes you cannot tell where the official church in the United States ends and where these conservative organizations begin.
Thank you. That is fascinating, and explains it very well. Where, though, is the US hierarchy? Where are the US bishops on this? Chris, I know, has reported on Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York's closeness, it seems, to President Trump. Yet we have other bishops who are very outspoken. What is happening with the church hierarchy? Are the bishops doing enough? What's happening in relation to Trump and this election with the hierarchy? Chris?
I'll start by this document the U.S. bishops produce. It's every 4 years, titled Faithful Citizenship, and it's effectively the bishop's guide for voting. And 2 years ago, the U.S. bishops had an open debate as to whether or not to adopt the guide to better reflect the priorities of the Francis papacy. It had not been updated in any real way to really sort of embrace the Pope's challenge on issues such as migration and climate change, as well as a host of other issues. And the U.S. bishops opted not to update the voting guide, but to instead produce an introductory letter to sort of encapsulate this new moment in the church life, as one bishop put it. And when they produced this new letter a year ago November, they stated that abortion is the preeminent priority for Catholic voters. Not a preeminent priority, but the preeminent priority. When one of the bishops who had suggested that language made his amendment, his proposal, in the justification for it that he filed, that's in the sort of paperwork that when it was circulated around, he said, the Supreme Court is so close to being able to overturn Roe v. Wade. And as one of my colleagues like to say, votes on the court and the number of justices on the court, the Catholic theology has nothing to say about that. They were going well beyond their purview there. But I think that sort of shows sort of the way in which they approach these issues and think about these issues. You reference Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. Last spring, he joined President Trump on a phone call for Catholic leaders that was effectively for the sake of saving Catholic schools and securing more funding for Catholic education during the global pandemic. And, on that call, the president, as he has a tendency to do, basically went into a campaign pitch. He says, "I've been the best president in the history of the Catholic Church." And he says, come November, please remember that life is on the ballot, religious liberty is on the ballot, school choice is on the ballot, and I'm the only one that's going to protect you on these issues. And rather than challenging or at least trying to sort of dial back the conversation, Cardinal Dolan said, "We need you more than ever, Mr. President." And while Cardinal Dolan does not speak for all U.S. bishops, arguably in his post as the Archbishop of New York, he has one of the most sort of consequential archdioceses in the country, and certainly a megaphone that is heard far and outside of New York. And it's been this real challenge. I think if you look at the way U.S. bishops vote on particular issues and for particular people to run certain committees, you see a real divide. We've seen that shift gradually over the last 8 years of the Francis papacy. There are bishops who are certainly bold and willing to speak in a way that challenges the president and uses language that reflects more of the Pope, but they are the exception and not the norm.
So is Cardinal Dolan Trump's private chaplain?
Well, they've certainly spent a fair amount of time together, and in fact, in 2018. Actually, the president and the first lady had a private meeting with the cardinal at his residence here in New York on Fifth Avenue, and no details have actually ever emerged as to the significance of that conversation. I think anyone that knows the president knows that he's not a particularly spiritual or devout person. This is someone who in 2016, when he was running, said, I don't ask for forgiveness, I don't pray, and so I don't think there's any affinity with sort of the faith that he's trying to solicit the Cardinal Dolan's counsel on. But they are two men who own valuable real estate on Fifth Avenue, and I think that's why the president relates to him in the way that he does.
Right. Thank you. And Steve, what is your take on the Catholic bishops on this question?
It very much parallels Chris. The only thing that I would add is I might highlight maybe just a tad more than Chris did, the changes that are taking place among the American episcopacy under Pope Francis. And so I'm actually looking back, as Chris mentioned, I had a similar position with the Obama campaign in 2012, as I do with the Biden campaign here in 2020, and I also was involved in the campaigns of 2008, 2004, kind of on Catholic issues. And as I kind of look back over the trajectory of all of those campaigns, I'm actually hopeful. I think that the church is in a better place now, more open on a number of issues, and the important primacy of the abortion issue, while, and something, by the way, I agree with, while it's still there, I think that it's much more balanced among the way that the bishops are talking about the issues in public life. today than it was in 2004, than it was in 2008 or 2012. So, I think that the impact of some of these Pope Francis bishops on the American episcopacy is starting to make a difference, and you see that in the votes that take place and that will take place in this upcoming November meeting of the bishops.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I'm sure that it will take a lot of time, like turning an oil tanker to get all the appointments in the right place. But I do know that the Pope is very keen on that. From my own reporting in Rome, I know he's very, very concerned about getting the right people into those dioceses. I'd like to open it up to questions now. If people would like to ask a question in the chat box, and we can get Chris or Steve's response. So please do ask away. Before we come to questions, though, one other point I wanted to ask was the Trump campaign strategy when it comes to Catholics. He does seem to have aligned with kind of fringe elements of the church. We've seen President Trump tweeting in favor of Archbishop Vigano, who, of course, called on Pope Francis to resign, and is kind of now a really sort of discredited figure in many respects. Why has the Trump campaign gone for these fringe groups? I mean, is that going to work?
I think the president realized in 2016 that he would not have been elected without the support of pro-life Catholics and white Catholics more broadly. And so he has sort of shown a deference to them over the past 4 years. It's interesting, when he gives interviews, he'll say things like, pro-life is your issue, right? When he's talking to Catholic audiences. So there's this personal distance from it, but he's acknowledging that this is important to an important sect of voters for him. And so he's willing to go along with it. You mentioned him tweeting in support of Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the disgraced former papal nuncio to this country. I think it's important to note that President Trump has no clue who this guy is and the baggage that is carried there. But the people that he has surrounded himself with and the folks he listens to, they do. And they do represent the fringes of the U.S. Catholic Church. Individuals such as Taylor Marshall, who is sort of this rogue internet sensation who is much more politically engaged than he is theologically. He's an advisor for the Catholics for Trump. The Catholics for Trump campaign posts things like the Vigano letter on their website. And in my view, and this isn't particularly sophisticated, it seems to be, these folks provided a path to victory in 2016, and they effectively get carte blanche this time around. And that's why I think we're getting some strange actors being introduced here.
Right. That's very interesting. And I also note that when Trump tweeted Vigano, he got the Italian accent correct on the O. So he can't have issued that tweet. Anyway, first question from Tim Wyatt. And Steve or Chris, just decide, you can, between yourselves, well, I mean, go with Steve first and Chris. Sorry, you can't decide between yourselves. But anyway, why are Catholics so much more keen on Biden than they were on Clinton in 2016? Is it simply about him sharing their faith, or is it more a rejection of Trump 4 years on? Steve.
I think it's a mix of things. It's certainly a rejection of Trump 4 years on. I think that's part of what we're seeing. On the other hand, I have to fault the Clinton campaign for not really going after the Catholic vote. I don't think that the campaign, realized that it wasn't what the parlance around campaigns. It wasn't a base election at all. She actually needed to reach beyond the base, and as a result of not going after the Catholic vote in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, she lost the election. So I have to fault her a little bit here. But yes, some of it is certainly also a rejection of Trump after 4 years. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. There's one word that we haven't talked about that I think it's important that we do talk about, and that's racism. And I think just the events over the past few months in this country, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the litany of individuals that have been of Black and brown individuals that have been killed in this country, and the way in which many Americans believe the president has incited racist tendencies and given them permission and even encouraged their behavior, I think has just turned off so many people of faith. And I think the Trump campaign has really struggled with how to deal with that. And they haven't had an effective way to counter that. Whereas the Biden campaign, I believe, has really done a fine job at changing the narrative and say, racism is the defining issue and it's the defining religious issue in this campaign. And that has been a talking point for some time now. And not just a talking point, I think it's something that you're hearing and seeing a lot of action on as well. And I think that that has been significant for people of faith.
Thank you. I would just say on Hillary Clinton, she was the most traveled Secretary of State, but she never went to the Vatican to see the Pope. So next question from Catherine Peppenster. To what extent are Catholic parishes Republican parishes or Democrat parishes? Are Catholic organizations supporting each candidate trying to get the vote out by targeting specific parishes in key states? Chris?
Yes, I'd like to highlight my colleague Heidi Schlump's reporting on this from earlier in the year. You can find her work at National Catholic Reporter, where groups such as Catholic Vote, which is one of the leading and most sort of well-funded Catholic groups working to elect President Trump, where they're trying to utilize geofencing technology to track movement at parishes to influence the Catholic vote. And Heidi explores that in great detail. Now, there's really no such thing as a Democratic parish and a Republican parish. You do have parishes that tend to be more social justice minded and those that tend to be more sort of abortion focused in their outreach and in their engagement. And the priests tend to offer homilies along those lines. But I think it's fertile territory, and both campaigns are aware of that.
Well, I agree. Both campaigns are aware of it. I think that the amount of money that right-wing Catholics have invested in their organizations pursuing this is kind of pitiful compared to what progressive Catholics have been able to put up. Chris mentioned CatholicVote.org. It's well known they're spending $7 million on their efforts. That's just an astonishing number compared to what might be available for progressive groups. In regards to Catholic parishes, being divided, I might actually push this a little bit farther than Chris did. I think that they are divided, and I think that if you map Catholic parishes across the United States by the socioeconomic neighborhoods that they're in, that it kind of perfectly mirrors, Republican parishes and Democratic parishes. That said, of course, every parish is an open parish that includes, both progressives and conservatives in it. So it's not, a black and white kind of thing, but there really are parishes that are much more Republican and much more parishes that are more Democratic.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on that point, Steve. And one of the things as a reporter that's been interesting to see and hear during the pandemic is with all of these parishes going to online masses, it's been a treasure trove for a reporter to hear different homilies to kind of get a sense of what Catholics in the pews are hearing across the country. Because ordinarily we wouldn't have, I couldn't bounce around as freely, but now I can quickly jump around and see and hear what people are hearing, and it's illuminating.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Ruth. How do you account for the changing status of Catholics in the US? 20 years ago, there apparently was a sizable portion of voters who would never vote for a Catholic, but that has really declined, and it's now in that proportion is now in single figures. So how would you account for that, Steve?
Well, it's assimilation. Catholics, came out of the ghettos and became part of American society. So much so that, in most polling, you cannot identify differences between Catholics on a number of cultural issues or political issues, and a random sampling of Americans generally. We've assimilated. So that's part of it. However, that assimilation was certainly hurried on by the presidency of JFK and the breakthrough of a number of prominent Catholics in American public and political life. So, in a sense, the fact that Amy Coney Barrett and Joe Biden are two Catholics, in a sense, right in the midst of running for office at this moment. I mean, that's owing to the pathbreakers like JFK, who kind of made being Catholic in America, a normal thing.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Amanda Hancock. What extent has Trump's attitude towards immigration and the Mexican-US border wall barrier turned people away from him? Of course, the Pope was asked about that in 2016, and he said, anyone who wants to build a wall is not a Christian. But to what extent has that issue turned people against him?
The Pew numbers on this, just in terms of the president's rhetoric, escape me. But I believe it's something like 6 or 7% oppressed. 6 to 7 out of 10 Americans, I think, are put off by his language and his rhetoric. Now, how that shapes and ultimately leads someone at the ballot box, I think kind of is reflected back on what we're seeing with this. Again, the president still is winning among white Catholic voters and suffering greatly when it comes to Hispanic Catholic voters. And that is in part due to immigration. But it's, in general, even among Catholic bishops, even sort of the more conservative Catholic bishops are quick to reject this sort of denigration of immigrants. And I look back to right after 2016, when the president was elected, and before the U.S. church was sort of roiled by the latest sex abuse sort of scandals. They were fairly united as a conference of Catholic bishops over or in opposition to the president's harsh, draconian immigration measures, and particularly his child separation at the U.S.-Mexico border.
I would say that if I could add something here, I think that one of the reasons that the bishops have been, in my estimation, more ambivalent about the politics of the election this year in comparison to some of the past years is because of immigration. I think the bishops in the United States have been very concerned about the Trump administration's policies on immigration, and it's reflected a kind of a tempering of the more narrow focus from the bishops that I saw in previous elections.
So another question, and this I think is a very important issue, is what kind of relationship do Catholic and evangelical Trump supporters have with each other? Now, you recall there was an article a number of years ago from Antonio Spadaro, an advisor to Pope Francis, who talked about an ecumenism of hate between Catholics and evangelicals who are sort of pushing the Trump agenda. How do you see that relationship, Chris?
I think if you look at who the president has surrounded himself with and the religious leaders that he's inclined to listen to and that do have his ear, they tend to be evangelicals, much more so than they do Catholics. And if you look at sort of the alliances that do exist between Catholics and evangelicals, where it's strongest is on the issue of abortion. And those that sort of singularly focus on this issue, they're allied hand in hand. I think that's a long-standing relationship that has probably become a bit more entrenched under President Trump. That being said, again, the issue of racism has become really significant in this campaign. And, you have folks that will, are saying proudly that I'm an evangelical Christian and I'm voting for Biden because of the issue of race. So it's by no means homogenous.
And Steve, just before you answer that, would you say that the alliances have really been redrawn? That Catholics and evangelicals sometimes have maybe more in common politically than, say, in the past. It was there'll be a Catholic block vote, or the Catholic community would be with this party, but now that's all changed, and there's the alliances are being redrawn.
I think they have been redrawn, as you say, Chris. I do think that there's some fraying in the alliance between conservative Catholics and conservative evangelicals, and I think that fraying is happening as a result, actually, of the papacy of Pope Francis. So that even conservative Catholics are concerned about the death penalty and concerned about the treatment of migrants, particularly the separation of families, and similar things. And the evangelicals don't have Pope Francis, and so they haven't been similarly affected. So I think that there's no doubt that there's still close connections, particularly around the issue of abortion, close connections between evangelicals and conservative Catholics. But I think that it's frayed somewhat in the last a couple of years, and I'll be curious to see if that fraying continues going forward.
Okay. Well, final question. What kind of president do you think President Joe Biden will be like then?
Well, I think he'll be a terrific president, of course. I'm one of the national co-chairs of Catholics for Biden, so I'm all in. I think the whole world is about to enter into some very trying times, so that we're not out of the tunnel, this dark tunnel, by any means yet. But nevertheless, I'm much happier to have Joe Biden at the helm of the United States rather than Donald Trump. So I'm very excited about it, and I think particularly as a Catholic, particularly as a social justice Catholic, the policies that the Biden campaign is talking about for a Biden administration excite me tremendously. Healthcare, immigration, the economy, and very important in my mind, addressing global climate change. I mean, these are all critically important things that for me as a Catholic, that I'm looking forward to, seeing some action on by a Biden administration.
And Chris, do you think Biden will practice what he preaches?
Well, yeah, I mean, just again, I approach this with my reporter's hat on, and Steve has answers a bit differently as someone involved in the campaign. But it's no secret that, whoever is either still in office or takes office come January faces, an economic downturn, severe health disparities and inequities in this country. And to the extent does Joe Biden practice what he preaches, I think you see that in the way he talks, and his convention speech, and even how he's handled the Supreme Court nomination here, which is a particularly polarizing issue. He's always pivoted back to these broader issues that are, sort of dinner table conversations for most Americans and affects their way of life. And for people of faith, his message to them has been that while we may not always disagree, you're going to have a seat at the table and be taken seriously by my White House. And I think the other thing that I think he's tried to sort of, drive home is that I will be a president who respects the rule of law. And for a lot of Americans who just want a little less chaos, I think that messaging is pretty effective.
Thank you. And we've come to the end of the session. I want to thank Chris and Steve, for sharing your insights and your thoughts. It's been fascinating, really informative and helpful discussion. Thank you everyone for taking part in this Religion Media Centre briefing. And I'll hand back over to Ruth.
Hello. Thanks very much indeed to Chris and your guests today. It was a very interesting discussion, particularly as you see secularization continue, and there we have faith right at the heart of the political debate, seemingly holding the ring and crucial in this election. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for your time. Just to say, if there are any journalists on the call who are going to use this, I hope you will, in your reports, don't forget to mention that it was on a Religion Media Centre briefing, if you can. If you'd like to keep in touch with us and receive our weekly newsletters and notice of further Zoom briefings, do leave your emails in the chat box as we go. We've got a post-election Zoom on Thursday, the 5th of November. So if you want to be invited to that, do just let us know. We've got another Zoom on Tuesday coming up, but meanwhile, for now, thanks again and take care.